Hello and welcome to the Beneverse Movie Channel, where today on this show I am talking with director and producer Sav Rodgers of Chasing Amy. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm talking to you, Ben. How are you doing?
I am doing great as well, and I'm really excited to dive into this movie, get to hear the making of this movie, because what I'm interested in today is, and I just want to start, I saw this movie last night. I think it's absolutely wonderful. I think it's one of my favorite documentaries I've seen this year. There's a connection, of course, with me and Kevin Smith as well. So I think anyone who has a love for Kevin Smith filmographies is going to gravitate and love this movie as well. But it's a very universal story. So first, and I'm always sorry to start off an interview with this question, but it's, what is the inception of Chasing Amy?
It's a great question because it's a very specific movie that comes from my very specific relationship to Chasing Amy. So, basically I saw Kevin Smith's movie Chasing Amy when I was 12 years old as a closeted queer kid in suburban Kansas. And, I didn't have much sense of self or identity or any of those things. But I was a huge movie fan. I was a huge TV fan, and Chasing Amy was the first movie that I really responded to. That just like really made me like think a lot deeper about myself. I saw something there that really resonated with me. So, at the time I was just going through Ben Affleck's whole filmography as like a 12-year-old, and I just was really into his movies. And Chasing Amy, there were so many things that resonated with me about it. Kevin's beautiful writing, the fluidity of sexuality of Alyssa Jones's character, the way that Holden was, I related to that deep sense of romanticism. The characters, were comic book writers, they were geeks, I was a geek, and but at the same time these LGBTQ characters had these very rich, full lives that I really hadn't seen in a film before. And so, when I saw that, it really changed a lot for me and made me start to think deeper. Now, that wasn't all at once when I was 12. It wasn't like an epiphany, aha moment, but it was this moment where I did start to like think deeper, and I would rewatch the movie obsessively. And as a result, like when I was having a really hard time in school, the movie became like a lifeline for me, and quite literally saved my life, because it was this thing that depicted queer people positively when, other kids my age and even adults were like clocking me as a queer person. But I didn't know it, like I wasn't sure who I was. And so it was this thing that like made me feel better about myself. So fast forward, a decade after that, like I'm giving a TED talk about Chasing Amy, and what it means to me. I come up with this idea, to do a movie about Chasing Amy, and it's like very specific relationship to the LGBTQ community, because there was this conflict there, between how I felt about Chasing Amy and how it saved my life as a queer person, but also these like very, real feelings that other people had about the way it depicted lesbians specifically. And, was it actually a progressive movie? How did it age? And I thought that conflict and that intersection was really interesting. And as time went on, the movie became more about my life and my coming of age, with Chasing Amy as the backdrop to it, hence Chasing Amy.
When was it? Because I rewatched this movie, I rewatched Chasing Amy, I should say, today. And there was a part of me that I forgot moments of that movie and some of the jokes in that movie and anything like that. And one, how I was allowed to watch it so young. How were you essentially able to just watch this movie? And how much did you understand it at, you said age 12?
Yeah, age 12.
How much did you understand it at that? I saw that too in the background, just drop. How much did you understand Chasing Amy just on a kind of just broad sex comedy basis?
Well, I mean, the movie's rated R, and I had to ask permission to watch it. At 12, I was going through this major Ben Affleck phase, and I took the movie to my mom, and I was like, "Hey, can I watch it?" And she was like, I don't remember really why it's rated R. I don't remember it being that bad." And so when I watched it, though, it was like scandalous. I was a very sheltered 12-year-old, so there were a lot of like sex jokes in there, but like, I had heard sex jokes before. Again, I was 12. Like everybody makes sex jokes, before they even really understand what sex is, right? So for me, I was like, oh, cool. I'm like, it feels like I'm watching something a little dangerous, something I'm not supposed to. So, in terms of like my comprehension, like, again, it was a relationship that like really deepened with the movie over time. I didn't understand everything at first watch. It was pretty sheltered in that way. But as time went on and I would rewatch the movie obsessively over the years, I'd always learn something new or realize like a joke that went over my head or, find deeper meaning somewhere. It was something that I continued to grow. As I continue to grow, I continue to revisit Chasing Amy and just, see how everything continued to change as I did, I guess, or how that stayed the same and I continued to change and ascribe new meaning from it.
Let's jump into the actual documentary itself, Chasing Amy. And there's a moment where every filmmaker, anyone who's going to go out, decides to make a movie. And like everyone who's had that passion has been there. It's very different of having that passion and then boots on the ground actually deciding to start making it and shooting it. What led you not to actually like make the movie, but what was that push where it's like day one, we're going to do this and we're starting with this? What was day one like for you?
But it's so funny, like what is day one even? So like 2015, I apparently came up with the idea. I was going through like my Google Drive notes to, like organize some stuff a while back. And I looked at a folder that said 2015 and there was this like document that said Chasing Amy documentary. And it was like kind of starting to ideate like what would it be, so 2015 was like the second year I was making movies even or within the first year. And so I come up with the idea pretty early on, but I started to get really serious about it when I was at the 2017 Telluride Film Festival. I was very lucky to be involved in the student symposium, which I highly recommend any college student apply to this program. Effectively, you get to participate in the Telluride Film Festival. They put you up. I think you have to pay for your own flight, but if you're one of 50 college students from around the world, I think, that's selected, you get to participate in this like very specifically curated program at like an incredible festival that kind of exposes you to, just how the festival world works and what Telluride is like. And it's this very intimate experience. And so when I was at Telluride in this like incredible program, I started to think about like the documentaries were there and, just like how they were positioned and, what their voices were. And I was still trying to really develop my artistic voice. And I think that's a lifelong process, but I was really trying to think about what's a movie that only I could make. And so in 2017, September 2017, Labor Day 2017, I started to really get serious about the idea and started to like really consider what it would be to make the movie. And then, as I was kind of preparing for that, I over the next year, there was this opportunity for this thing called the TED residency program, which was like an incubation idea incubator that you would spend 3 months of research time in TED HQ working on an idea, and then you would give a TED talk about it.
Yeah.
And I like applied the day of the deadline, and I hadn't really considered like what it would be to give a TED talk, but it was free to apply to. And I was like, hey, why not? I lose an hour applying for this, and effectively against all odds, I was selected for it. And so I moved to New York from Lawrence, Kansas, or Olathe, Kansas, on September 1st, 2018. And that was what I consider to be officially day one of making Chasing Amy. And from there, I started the pre-production process. I spent 3 months really preparing to shoot the first couple of days while I was in New York, and made a plan to go to New Jersey to shoot at all the locations that Kevin shot Chasing Amy at. So we did our first couple of talking head interviews at TED HQ, the very last day of the TED residency program, a week after I gave the TED talk. The next day we went to New Jersey, shot at all the Chasing Amy locations. And then from there, I moved to LA right after. And from there, it was like a continuous process of like, okay, how can we get enough money to shoot the next couple of days? How can we, build enough buzz to get the next couple of interviews? So yeah, September 1st, 2018, we consider day one of Chasing Amy.
You mentioned this part there where you're talking about you present your TED talk, and then about a week later, you're now like sitting down with cast members of one of your favorite movies. That has to be a surreal moment for you.
Yeah, I mean, when the TED Talk came out, it was totally surreal. I gave it in December 2018, and then it came out April 30th, 2019. And during that period of time, I was settling into LA and doing this program with Outfest, that was for a young filmmakers fellowship. And so at the time, I was just trying to figure out how we were going to be able to shoot our next couple of days, trying to figure out how we were going to fundraise because we were a very, very scrappy production. And then the TED Talk comes out, and within the first hour of it being online, enough people have sent it to Kevin that he publicly responds and says that he wants to be in it. Which was such a kind, lovely response that I couldn't have really anticipated it working out that well. It was just totally mind blowing. And it was surreal, but at the same time, we were doing the work to be prepared to be able to shoot our next couple of days. And so at the same time as like it's this huge like professional milestone, it's also this major like, oh my God, we did it kind of thing. And it was wonderful. It was a wonderful experience because not nobody had to participate in chasing Amy. Nobody was like forced to. Nobody had their arm twisted. Like, well, you better do it. Nobody was getting finger wagged at, as far as I know. And but for everybody to like give their time, whether it was somebody from Chasing Amy or somebody who gave us, commentary, or somebody who, donated their time to mentor me or whatever it was, like all of it mattered in the end and really contributed to this like larger, beautiful thing that, I'm always going to be grateful for.
There's this moment in the film where, when watching it, I was so struck by how similar it is to Kevin Smith's writing and just its pure honesty. But in that honesty requires vulnerability on your part. There must have been a moment when you're making this film where you're just like, is this a good idea for me? Like, there's an honesty to this film that I am now putting out for the world. And do I actually want that? Like, in there, how did you work through that?
I mean, that is the question, Ben, because I didn't want to be in the doc. I didn't set out to like be in the documentary, but when you have enough really smart people around you telling you, hey, we're here because of your emotional ties to Chasing Amy, and we think you're the main character of this story, at a certain point, you either are holding up the process creatively or you kind of have to listen, and there's a crossroads. There's a crossroads where I make the original version of what I intended, which is a straightforward documentary and doesn't have this personal angle, or I make the movie that we ended up making, right?
Mhm.
And I chose to make what I thought was the most compelling version of the movie, though it was at a great sacrifice to my ego. That's the only way I can
Mhm.
describe it, because like I didn't. It's very difficult to like watch yourself come of age in a film. Like, when we watch a coming of age story, we're watching for a lot of things, but it's that growth and change over time. And that does require vulnerability, whether it's fiction or documentary. So being the director and also being the principal participant in the documentary, it felt like there were a lot of things conflicting with me as the filmmaker and me as the human being, right? There
Mhm.
were a lot of moments that like, were difficult to rewatch, whether it was, mistakes that I had made or moments that felt vulnerable, or even like chronicling my transition, right, in real time. With film, with cinema, you're kind of immortalizing images on screen for people to remember and to empathize with. And I don't know a ton of trans people that would want their pre-transition selves documented forever for people to remember. But at the same time, it was an important part of the story to see my growth and change over time, which required that vulnerability and honesty. So it was immensely challenging, but full credit to all of the wonderful people who worked on the movie. Like, when you watch Chasing Amy, there's a long list of people who worked on it, and made it really a lot easier for me to go to those places because I felt safe and I felt held by my collaborators. And that's something that is invaluable, whether or not you're in a documentary about your own life or not. Like it's that sense of safety is so important. So yeah, it was really tough, but at the end of the day, like I'm really proud of what we made and what we made together. And it it's also like as a documentarian, you're often asking people to be vulnerable.
Mm.
And like I felt like if I wasn't vulnerable along with them, it would have been just totally inauthentic. And it would have been, like a little, it would have been gross, to not show like the hard parts of my own journey there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, in examining this movie and your relation with Kevin, I'm sure then when you're processing all this information, you had to have just picked Kevin's brain about it and finding that honesty and truth. Was there a moment that you remember where Kevin just kind of gave you advice that really just shaped how this movie ended up being?
Well, so Kevin's not a producer on it, and Kevin never saw any cuts until we were completely done. The
Mm,
version that you watched is the version that Kevin watched at the very end. Um, but I did, over the years, Kevin has, made himself so generously available to me if I did ever have any questions. But I never went to him with like a, hey, I don't know how to handle like this specific story kind of like things. At least I don't
mm,
think. Um, but I am a fan of his work and I am very influenced by his filmmaking. If you look at Kevin's filmography, there are so many stories about masculinity and kind of becoming a new version of yourself. I think you look at Clerks, you look at Chasing Amy, you look at, all of so many of his movies. They're kind of about like, overcoming like the fragility of your own masculinity in some ways. And
mm.
yeah, I'm deeply influenced by his work and his sense of humor. And, so I mean, there are a lot of parallels between our lives, just period, like without either of us being writers, even like, the way we grew up, the way that we felt about ourselves, things like that. Because a lot of, the things that inform us, I think are pretty universal. You take the fact that I'm influenced by his work, you take the fact that I'm talking about his real life, you talk about the parallels of my life with his, you talk about the parallels between my life and Chasing Amy, and it all kind of blends together and it is influenced by him so much in that way. um so it's like, even if I didn't ever like ask him explicitly for like, story advice or structure advice as a filmmaker, I had been learning from his body of work my whole life, along with so many other incredible filmmakers who you see in the archival that we use from like the nuclear cinema movement. And so even if I didn't like have an explicit question for Kevin, like, because like his filmography was kind of part of my cinematic rearing, like he
Mm.
was like, yeah, I could go back to his work as like a reference for like that authenticity that I like sought out in the first place. Because this is a story about becoming, right, coming
Mm.
of age, right,
Yeah.
which is like so many of the work that he's done, I guess, if that makes sense.
No, that makes complete sense. And in that process, I'm sure you go into it with ideas that you want to hit on. And then as the film progresses and you learn, you have to kind of let yourself go to maybe not necessarily the flow, but just like the story is going to go where the story needs to go. Was what for you was something that you weren't expecting to discover when going into making this documentary that you're like, this is now so crucial to being a part of this documentary's identity?
Ben, I gotta say, you were such a thoughtful interviewer. I'm
Thank you.
really into your questions here. Um, I
Thank you so much. That means the world to me.
Of course, as a guy that asks people questions for a living half the time, I really appreciate it. Um, there was so much of like what I thought the movie would be that I just had to completely drop because there's a version of the movie that's just like total fan service to Chasing Amy, and
Mhm.
you see explored in there. And then, but I think the Joey interview really changes the dynamics of the movie and is really like a challenge in so many ways of like, okay, well, this has been your experience so far. I'm going to tell you my experience with it. And you now have a choice of how you want to go forward and proceed. And so when somebody trusts you with their truth in that way, it's kind of a call to action of like, okay, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And for me, the thing that was so daunting as like both a filmmaker and a person is like, well, who am I if I'm not defined by my love of this movie as I've been
Yeah.
for so long, since I was 12, right? And that's like real shit. It's not movie shit. It's like the real work of life of, well, who am I? Who am I going to choose to be? Where am I going to choose to go from here? And that moment isn't what I expected at all. You know, you can see it on my face in the
Yeah.
interview, but it is so it is so much of where I needed to go, which was to take a step back and think about, well, who are you? Who do you want to be? You know, it's you think of like the hero's journey, right?
Yeah, of
And
course.
somewhere around here, like it's a circle, right? Like somewhere around like here is where the hero gets the thing, gets all the things that he wanted, right? But it doesn't like bring him the fulfillment or the joy or the happiness he wants. And then somewhere like right here is the hero realizes that he had the thing he wanted the whole time, or gets the thing that he didn't know he wanted.
Mhm.
And what I had in my life, Riley, um,
Yeah.
what I gained from this relentless pursuit of chasing Amy, community, you know, love, all of these things, a purpose. That was the important part. You know, it wasn't, you know, the community I gained, everything, the relationships I gained from this whole process. That's what mattered. It wasn't, you know, chasing Amy. Chasing Amy as a movie cannot love me back, but the community I've gained, the people I've deepened relationships with as a result, the knowledge of my craft that I've learned over the time, like that's the real fulfilling shit. And I kind of had to, and I took that step back and was able to kind of realize like, yeah, this is the shit that matters. And I was able to kind of grow in that way. And again, like that's that's the ticket right there, right?
Yeah, of course. And just for context for the listeners who haven't seen this movie, you mentioned the name Riley. Riley is your fiance now at this?
My
Oh,
wife,
that's
married.
right. I you showed that in the movie too, if I recall
Yeah,
right.
yeah, 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 yeah.
That's to me where the movie gets really special, is because there is a part of Chasing Amy when we were watching it today. It was a movie about it's kind of packaged as a love story, and then it's someone finding their identity. This
Mm.
movie is kind of your movie, I should say, is a documentary about someone looking for their identity, and then it ends up kind of being a secretly great like love story throughout. And that, how, and sorry, I'm having trouble like describing this feeling that I had when watching this movie, but when did Riley become a part of the production of this movie? When did that begin for you?
You know, it was a moment. I mean, she's been there the whole time in so many
Yeah.
ways. You know, like, um, you know, we've been together 9 years this year, so she's been with me every step of the way. But
Congratulations.
thank you. I'm a lucky dude. You can see it in the movie just how lucky I am.
Yeah.
But uh you know, and she's the star, and she's loving all this attention.
Yeah.
It's pretty great. Um, but you know, I don't know the specific moment that I was like, no, she's got to be in it. But I did, you know, she was there the whole time being supportive. You know, she didn't see the full movie until even after Kevin did.
Mhm.
I wanted it to be just right for her to see it. But like, you know, she would see bits and pieces over the years and like help me work through story problems and all of that. Um, along with the rest of the team. But, you know, she's been there the whole time in so many ways. And on camera, you know, it wasn't until I had really explored thoroughly this chasing Amy part of it that I really started to dig into my personal story. Again, you know, it was a thing that was a work in progress over time. But you know, if we were going to tell my story is, you know, so intertwined with her
Mhm.
and the person that I've been able to become as a result of somebody who's been impacted positively by her friendship and her love.
Mhm.
And that's all I'll say. I mean, I've already probably said too much, but you know, it's
Yeah, of course.
but there is no chasing Amy without her.
Yeah. And to kind of wrap up this interview, there this moment that you talked about earlier, you premiere or you first get the idea, you're at Tribeca in, I think you said 2017. And then if I am correct, if I remember reading this correctly, Chasing Amy then premiered at Tribeca this past year, correct?
Yeah, I
At the
moved to
film
New
festival?
York. I moved to New York for TED, and then to bring it back for its world premiere at Tribeca, to go back to the place where it really all began. It was just amazing. So yeah, it was a full circle moment there.
That's must have been such a special moment to screen this movie, and then just like the response that it gets shortly after. And I wanted to ask you about it. What, as a filmmaker, what was the thing you learned the most about yourself at when Chasing Amy, you've concluded production, you're looking back and you're like, of all the things I want to take away from this movie, this is the one thing I learned as a filmmaker.
Ooh. I learned, I think at Tribeca, just how process driven I really am.
Mhm.
You know, when you're working on a project for so long, oftentimes you think about like, what you hope people take away from it, what you hope the reception is, what you hope the impact is, right? And by the time that we got to the point of premiering at Tribeca, I felt like we had already won in so many ways, because it's
Mhm.
like, oh my God, we get to have this moment together. We've been working on this for 4.5 years, and we get to experience this huge win together. But I was surprised by how I wasn't as like obsessed with what people thought of it as I thought I would be. And I
Mhm.
wasn't as like focused on the promotion and reception of it. What I ended up being like really proud of what we had made without any kind of external validation, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Like
of course.
the premiere at Tribeca, obviously that's some sort of external validation,
Mhm.
but I felt really confident in my point of view as a filmmaker, even without knowing what a review was going to say.
Yeah.
And the reviews have almost all been like lovely, which has been fantastic. I couldn't have imagined like, such a kind response to it. But also like, I'm so happy that that's not what I hang my hat on at the end of the day. What I hang my hat on is like, if the movie works for me, and to be able to really stand by everything that we did in the movie with the team that we made it with, like it, that I think was a huge moment of growth for me, because I think as artists, like, we're so concerned about like what other people think of us and like the movie or the work that we're doing all the time. But to be proud of it, like even without that, was a huge learning moment for me. And that's when it really set in, was at Tribeca. All of these shiny things are happening,
Mhm.
but I'm feeling good about the work we did, regardless of what anybody else thinks.
Sav, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. I just wanted to give you a moment. How can the people watch Chasing Amy?
Oh gosh, the people can watch Chasing Amy. Right now, it's playing at film festivals around the country. At the time that we're doing this interview, it's going to play at Outfest on July 23rd for our LA premiere. We're also playing in Reno, San Diego, Denver, and a bunch more places coming down the line. There are some virtual screening options. There's mostly in-person screening options. So if you want to see the movie, be sure to request it at your local theater or local film festival, and we'll try to get it to you as soon as possible. And you can follow us on social media at Chasing Amy Doc everywhere.
And I'll just share my praise. This is a lovely film. Please go out and support this movie. It is really worth your time. Sav, thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you all for watching this interview. My name is Ben Friedman. Thank you so much. Take care and bye bye.